because it's, I mean, if you're an ag guy, okay, thanks. If you're an ag guy, you know, you don't have a W-2, right? You don't have the standard paperwork kind of stuff. And they stopped doing them because the compliance risk is so high for them. And their after-tax profit last year was $200,000, and a Dodd-Frank fine is $110,000. And they just don't feel that the risk, so they stopped doing it. Stop lending for, can't refinance a house. Now, the other one was the guy is actually a banker and works for a small bank and was going to refinance the loan on his house, get a lower interest rate. He's got 7%, wants to go down, but he doesn't want to refinance the whole house, just wants to refinance the what he's got left on his mortgage. $44,000 left. He's got a 780 credit score. Applies to refinance, they say you can't. It's turned down. And normally you don't, I guess, find out why. But the guy works for the bank in town, right? And the reason was the origination fees were too high a percentage of the value of the loan. If he wanted to borrow $100,000, they'd let him. This is stupid. And let alone the requirements in Dodd-Frank on auditing your manufacturing and supply chain to find out how many minerals in anything you manufacture or sell comes from the Congo or 12 countries around the Congo. I mean, and that's in Dodd-Frank as well. They don't prohibit you using those minerals, and it's because there's a civil war over the mines in the Congo. Well, how many minerals are in this? AT&T sells 25 million of these a year from 50 different suppliers in 60 different countries. And they have to audit that supply chain and certify the audit. And here's the stupid part. If you're willing to start a war over a mine, you think you'd be willing to lie to an auditor? Stupid. So Dodd-Frank, I think it's killing the small banks particularly. They didn't create the problem. With respect to big banks and the issue of financial regulation generally, there is obviously in 2007, 2008, there's a relationship between what was happening in housing and mortgages and what then precipitated the financial crisis. And I would say that the one thing that I think would make the biggest change, and I understand this used to be one of the rules, that if you originated a mortgage, you had to keep a certain percentage of that loan on your books. That one change, I think, would have meant that the crisis that happened in 08 wouldn't have happened. Because I think there are a lot of people loaning, doing liar loans, and and because they know they've got no skin on the game. They're going to be selling that loan to somebody else who's going to chop it up in 100 pieces within 30 days. So there's no risk. And so you're out there, and your job is to push the loans, get people to sign off on these things. Even if you don't believe, as a responsible mortgage lender, they're going to be able to pay you back. Well, if you're the one who has to be paid back, then that creates the incentive within the system needed to be responsible. So I think that one change would make a huge difference that thousands of pages of regulations will not. Yes, sir?
Actually, it's an extension on what he was talking about. You've already answered the question about the tax status, and we appreciate your stand on that. You also are familiar with the migration that's going on right now. We're all benefiting from that migration where people are closing their accounts at banks and coming to credit unions for the obvious reasons.
Competition's a wonderful thing.
Well, it is. It is. Now, there's a growing sentiment in the banking industry, though, where they're becoming increasingly bitter on two fronts. One, that they're losing all these customers that took them years to get. And secondly, they're going to credit union, which is their arch rival, so to speak.
I've never noticed that, by the way.
Huh?
Never noticed if there's any tension at all.
So,
if you get elected, you will.
So, looking ahead, everybody in this room and beyond is expecting an increase in an intense pressure on Congress to tax credit unions. Now, you've already answered the question about taxing credit unions, but the question is, how are you preparing for the increased pressure that will be coming to Congress in the next year or two to tax credit unions, because it's no secret the ABA has come out and said, we believe that if credit unions are taxed, that that'll put us on even ground. And so now we have a fighting chance. If the legislation's going to kill us, taxation might kill them, and so now we're on even ground. And there's going to, and as you know, the bank lobby is a very powerful lobby. How are you going to handle that?
Yes, I've been there, done that. I mean, I'm trying to remember some of the issues that we went through, and we've been through for 10 years, where y'all would come in and sit down and listen, and the bankers would come in and sit down and listen, and sometimes I agree with them, and sometimes I agree with you. My general philosophy is jobs come from small business. I believe in free enterprise and competition, particularly as it relates to consumers and small business kinds of things, and that anything that promotes competition and free enterprise generally is good for citizens. And so those are my general philosophy of things. It was, you know, I didn't really understand this before I was elected to Congress. I sure understood it shortly thereafter, that you guys are often at loggerheads. And sometimes I think, you know, the differences aren't that big, but there's sometimes not a willingness to get together and kind of work on things. So, you know, you hear everybody out and you try to do the best you can within the framework and the philosophy that I have, which is supporting free enterprise and making sure citizens and consumers are the priority.
Good. Thanks.
And I tell you a story. When obviously I went through tough elections and people beat you up for all kinds of things, but at in the end of we have 3 kids. We have 1 grown son and 2 teenagers. So if anybody wants to trade, see after. But they're good kids. But my oldest son, who was a foster son, who couldn't scare away, come to after this, you know, god-awful election where people beat me around the head and shoulders, and he said to me, "We won. We didn't expect to win, frankly." And he said, "You know, you were one tough mother." And I didn't even slap him. So it comes with a job. Yes, sir.
I guess I'd like to, you know, look back in history, take us down a course, and in its 1990s, and Republicans had Congress and the Senate, and fast forward it to 2000, the Democrats have control of the House and the Senate. And it's interesting, we have gone anywhere but forward when that happens. I think that, you know, President Obama got elected, in my mind, because of his promise to do things differently in Washington. The fundamental change has to be in Washington. But unfortunately, it seems like he went to Washington, and the next day it was the same old thing. The same Congress people, the same senators, the same whatever, doing exactly what they've been doing for the last 100 years. And he even admits in the speech that there's this wall around Washington that's so disconnected from the rest of the country. And that's what's leading and making all the regulations that we talk about that filter down to a lot of the questions we have here. But fundamentally, if you're our senator, how do you break that down? I mean, you know, again, you're one of 100. But at some point in time, somebody's got to say enough's enough. You know, you know, politics, it's just like your comment about banks and credit unions are close, but we can't get together, we don't talk. It's the same way with Republicans and Democrats. And there is just a real breakdown in that. And so, if you were elected, what would you do to, you know, now, it's not going to happen overnight.
I tend to look at problems and try to address them. One of the advantages, I think, of the Senate over the House is the opportunity not only to look at problems and address them, but to frame the big issues and questions and try to drive an agenda to achieve important things. And I am more of a workhorse than a show horse. Try to stay very connected to community. And you're right about maybe if we were from Detroit, Washington would be a step up. But in 10 years, in the United States House